Communications World Headquarters.
This is Wake Up Mid-Missouri.
Get ready, pal.
Here's your host, Randy Tobler.
The beginning of the 2024 legislative session in the Senate has been nothing short of an embarrassment. A chamber designed to be occupied with civil, principled statesmen and women have been overtaken by a small group of swamp creatures who all too often remind me more of my children than my colleagues. This group has heard the cry of Missourians, this group behind me, who are demanding more of us. They have demanded progress, stability, and the passage of policies that will provide better schools, a stronger economy, and safer communities around this state. Instead, the Chaos Caucus has chosen to use the Missouri Senate as a place to try and salvage their languishing statewide campaigns and intentionally destroy the institution in an effort to claim that the game is rigged against them. They are willing to upend more than a century of tradition and honor simply so they can continue to receive a paycheck.
That was Caleb Rowden as he dropped a nuclear bomb on the Senate committee leadership and the political scene in Missouri. I'm Randy Tobler, along with Stephanie Bell.
Good morning.
Producer Hannah.
Hello.
And John Marsh, who probably couldn't sleep all night on the wake of that news. How you doing, John?
I tell you what, it was wow.
I mean, and we find ourselves in the middle of it here on 93.9 The Eagle. Not that we had anything to do with what happened, but...
And News Radio KWS.
And KWS News Radio 104.5 News Radio 950. Now, look, we have been...
Something like that.
We have had Bill Eigel on. We have had Cindy O'Loughlin on. Yesterday, Cindy was on our show. Shortly after, Bill Eigel was on Gary Nolan's show. At the end of that interview, now I was driving... And I was fighting some traffic at the time. I would have sworn I heard Bill Eigel say that they need to start referring bills to committee. Brian Hauswirth reports this morning on his news copy that, in fact, Cindy had said he had the numbers. Cindy had reported up 12 initiative petition bills. Well, they had reported to committee, 20 school reform bills, and I think 31 tax reform bills. This is monumental movement in the Senate. We don't know. It now puts O'Loughlin and Rowden on the high wire. They're on the high wire with no safety net. Things are going to have to get done, or else I could see some more fireworks. What say you?
It's a mess. It's honestly a mess. But I wasn't surprised by yesterday, and we got word yesterday in one of these press conferences, or maybe from Twitter, that the Freedom Caucus had gotten word over the weekend that this might be coming. I think the real shock was not only did they lose their committee assignments, but the audacity. Their parking spots were also taken away, and that seemed to really anger a lot of people. But you know, it's been a long time coming, and I think some people yesterday were saying, finally, this was going to come to a head. Let's get this over with now. But if you look at the Freedom Caucus members, I mean, I think people forget that they are in the minority. They don't have a majority. They are a minority caucus. And so if you think about it, there is a way to control the Senate, and that is to elect enough people that agree with you that then you have a majority. And the Freedom Caucus didn't do that. And I know right when they did get a whole bunch of new senators, there was a lot of talk. They were talking to the new senators about who would join the Freedom Caucus. So at that point, they had the opportunity to convince the majority of their colleagues to join their caucus. They didn't get that done. Then we went into leadership elections. They lost leadership elections. They didn't get that done. And so they are a minority caucus. They've been behaving that way. And there are long traditions and rules in the Senate about what you get when you're the minority caucus. Ask the Democrats. You don't get committee chairmanships, and you don't get the good parking spots. Well, and so I think, yesterday, the people in the majority said, hey, if you're going to behave like a minority caucus, we're going to treat you like a minority caucus.
And Caleb Rowden will be joining us at 7:10. Cheri Toalson Reisch at 7:35. Susan Klein, Missouri Right to Life at 8:10. Brian Hauswirth joins us now. And Brian, I can only think that this is going to either be spun on the one side as disciplinary action. They're getting spanked. The dunce cap's going on. They're put in the corner. On the other hand, and we'll ask Caleb Rowden, hey, is this to imply that they had the chance in their committees to move these bills and they claimed they weren't moving on your back, but it was really on their back? Now, these new committee leaders have to perform.
Well, a couple things. The first things first, we need to emphasize what Cindy O'Loughlin said yesterday, and you've given the numbers, but I want to give them one more time. I want people to listen closely. It's numbers. She says her caucus has filed 12 initiative petition bills, 20 school reform bills, 31 tax reform bills. I want to say that again. It's worth repeating because Eigel sounded like he was disputing those numbers, or maybe disputing where they were going. I almost think that he wanted his bills, particularly in those issues, to be referred, but not.
I texted Brian Hansen when I heard the interview, and we're going to find it again and play it. But I would have sworn at the end of Bill Eigel's time with Gary Nolan, he said they need to get these bills referred to committees, and they've done it. In fact, I heard over the weekend, Cindy told me personally, 300 bills have already been referred. Well, so I don't understand it.
And I don't.
Both can't be true.
I think, well, and again, it gets real technical, and I'm not sure. I don't know that everything's been referred. They
I don't know everything, but lots.
But the point is, they're out there. They are out there right now. To Stephanie's point, the parking spot is Stephanie knows better than anybody. Parking at that Capitol building is terrible. So for a 16-year House member, 16-year legislator, Denny Hoskins, who represents Cooper County, to not have a parking spot, that is pretty rare. Now, I don't know if they could get him a spot somewhere else. Eigel's only been there for, I guess this is his 8th year because he didn't serve in the House. Koenig's a 16-year member.
Well, Eigel's spot was moved. He posted where his new spot was, and he wasn't happy about it.
They had spots. I think as a committee chair, you get spots in the actual basement of the Capitol, and everyone else parks in the Senate garage, which, if you don't know, is kind of on the backside of the Capitol, and there is a tunnel from that garage, so you don't have to walk out in the elements. But it's not a short walk, and depending on where you are, maybe you have to go up a couple flights and then take the tunnel.
Then they have to walk in the elements. Have they never heard of an umbrella? I'm sorry. You know what? It would be good for these people to have to walk a few blocks and get some of their steam out before they walk under the chamber. Yeah,
that particular garage. If you're coming out late at night, there's not as much security. I've been in that garage, so the Capitol Police could certainly use some more security in there.
Holster and a weapon.
That notwithstanding, it is very interesting to me that. I was surprised by it. And the timing of it specifically.
Yes.
The day before the governor's state of the
Fascinating.
State address.
John Marsh, your reaction to the bombshell news from yesterday.
My take on it was I immediately thought back to the early 90s when Missouri voters by a large margin amended the state constitution and put term limits on there. I remember in the days before term limits, there's no way that GOP senators from different caucuses at the Capitol would have got into a fight or a wedding match like this, because back in those days you had to work with these people year after year after year, and you burn those bridges, you were done.
Yep, that's exactly right. And when they did debate, it was more civil, and it was the Democrats were in the supermajorities. But John, the only other thing about that is there was a guy in the House that challenged Speaker Griffin. That was the exception. That was Anthony Roboto from St. Louis. And not only was chairmanships taken away, his office was taken away. They put his desk out in the Capitol hallway. They gave him a phone, no computer, nothing. But that's it.
Tony Roboto.
Like a bag phone. And let's not forget that we are in an inflammatory social media time in our country's history. So there's a cultural element here as well.
Well, and that's another thing I took away from yesterday was yesterday evening, afternoon, Twitter kind of came ablaze, and suddenly we had an influx of people from D.C. who were like, can you believe what is happening in Missouri? I'm like, have you ever been to Missouri? And so I put out a tweet yesterday that said, if you really want to know what's going on in Missouri, why don't you ask somebody from Missouri? Because the story you're getting from people who've never been here or who live in D.C. about what's happening in our state is quite different than I think if you ask people on the ground. And I got really frustrated yesterday seeing all these people who know nothing about the situation commenting that suddenly, we're just don't even get me started.
You bring up a very good point, because it not only a Missourian, but particularly people that are close to it. So we'll see what happens.
We have one of our active listeners on the text line. I click on the link that he says, and it's a Nixon. It's a picture. It's a reel of Nixon saying Nixon warns against the media elitist complex.
Is that us?
I think that's us.
Oh.
There we go.
There you go. Proudly wearing the badge of calling balls and strikes. I think any one of you out there, including me, I don't know, Stephanie, you're probably closer to it, John, and Brian, I've not been as close to, until you've sat in a leadership position, either at a committee chairmanship level, I'm not talking either side here, or a leadership position like Caleb Rowden or Cindy O'Loughlin, I don't think we have standing. Until you've been at that level of leadership, it's very, very difficult. And we should remind people, American governance in general, Missouri governance in particular, is built to be slow and not be quixotic and not be fickle. That's designed that way. Just think a few decades behind, or 3 decades when we had Democrat leadership. Would you have been happy if the Democrats would have come in and bullied their way through and done everything they wanted to do? Or 5 or 10 years from now, if there's Democrat leadership, would you like a small band of squad Democrat-type leaders to take over and get their way and just do what they wanted? I don't want that.
Well, again, I'll leave the policy issues to you guys, but I think the thing we have to keep in mind, the governor's going to deliver his state of the state address today at 3. It's going to be overshadowed by this. I mean, there is no doubt about it. And, you know, the bottom line, Eigel, Hoskins, Koenig, and Bratton. And worth mentioning, Hoskins represents Cooper and Howard counties in our listening area. They probably vote with Rowden in the leadership 90% of the time. They probably do. And you know, but they're just not getting along. And I did see one television reporter last night, I won't name her, local television reporter, who said on TV last night, this is unheard of for Republicans to be infighting like this at the Capitol. No, it's not. They've been doing it for the last 2 years. I mean, so, you know, it's still unusual, but not recently. It's not.
Look at Capitol Hill.
And
Yeah,
I would remind
exactly.
folks that those of you who think that suddenly something's changed in the rules, that things couldn't get done, the rules are no different now than they were 5, 10, 12 years ago. Big things have gotten done, right, Stephanie, under the current rules. So it's not a matter of the rules.
Some tweaks to the rules.
But I mean, basically, in terms of the basic structure and the basic order of business,
it's the same.
That hasn't changed.
Right.
So that's not the problem. I think we got a people problem here. I'm not pointing fingers. There's a people problem in terms of behavior.
Yeah, yesterday.
No, I think Senator Rowden pointed the finger for you, Randy.
Yeah, yesterday the phrase that kept coming to mind, which I'll have to sanitize for radio, was fool around and find out.
Oh, boy. Okay.
FAFO.
All right. FAFO. All right. It's 20 after.
But then somebody ran up to the stage all dressed up nicely when it was at 7. But now I just walked up and it's at 14. But she ran up when it was 7. And, you know, we have to do what's good for our party. And she was up and I said, wow, she's doing like a speech like she won. She didn't win, she lost. And
that's the Daily DC Rundown starter with Donald Trump talking about Nikki Haley. Stephanie?
You gotta love Trump for the theater. And notably, the only person you can see in this shot of him speaking is Tim Scott. And there's been a lot of talk about Tim Scott lately and whether he will be the VP pick. I don't think that was on accident. But yeah, it's interesting to hear, and this is what caught my attention. It's interesting to hear Trump talk about how Nikki Haley is claiming winning something that she didn't win, when that's been the criticism of Trump the whole time about claiming that he won something that he didn't. But she's pretty good at it because, you know, if you recall, she said it's a 2-person race and everyone's like, and you're not one of the 2. And then last night her speech was very much kind of the same speech you would have expected had she have won, and she didn't. Now, some people are saying they're surprised that Trump didn't have a larger margin last night. But Nikki had spent a lot of time and resources, and with all of the independents voting, you know, I'm not surprised at the margin.
The CNN crew interviewed a young Democrat who stated that he had registered as independent back in October. He voted for Nikki Haley, but he will definitely be voting against whoever the GOP nominee is. You don't know what those numbers were. But she comes in, 11% behind the last I checked.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we had Biden had a pretty successful write-in night, but yesterday he was talking somewhere, and he's long gone. What did he say?
We'll teach Donald Trump a valuable lesson. Don't mess with the women in America unless you want to get the benefit.
Don't mess with the women of America unless you want to get the benefits? What does that mean?
What a rallying cry there, Mr. President.
And thanks for translating that for me, because I heard, don't mess with the
Don't mess with the women. He knows about smelling the women's hair of America. What benefits is he going to get?
I don't know. That was rough. So he did have a good night, but maybe he didn't have such a good day as he was trying to deliver some remarks. Also in Congress, what we're hearing, there's still talks about a potential move on the border, still talks about funding in Ukraine. There is no consensus, and conservatives are really concerned about the potential border deal, in that that's a big issue. We've been seeing the polling on that issue, that it's coming out at number 1 right now. And so I think conservatives are worried about, compromising too much or giving Biden a win before the election. And so there is, again, no consensus, but it looks like maybe there'll be, if something does move forward, we're not expecting a vote in the Senate until next week. Also, a showdown is happening in Texas. Of course, the Supreme Court had a big ruling this week that they said the feds can come in and cut the razor wire. And according to Texas and the feds, Texas is not allowing them to come in and cut the razor wire. I kind of love this.
It's a showdown.
It's Texas, right?
Yeah.
So how that is going to shake out when the highest court in the land tells you to do something and you give them the middle finger, that's tough.
On that note, Tom Homan was on the stage with Donald Trump yesterday. He's been the vociferous servant at the border for 6 administrations. He likes to talk about that. No border's been tighter than when Trump was there. And I can see already Trump telegraphing who's going to be in which cabinet positions come a Trump administration. And that could really help propel his candidacy. There's no doubt about that.
And Texas will secede from the union.
chairmanships and in committee vice chairmanships.
Not that I agree with it, but Senator Rowden takes a lot of grief from folks. They like to call him spineless and gutless.
Yesterday it was petty.
Yeah. But now he's finally kind of, dropping the iron hammer, and folks are critical of that. It's like, what do you want? He can't win.
I have to say, Bill Eigel was a captain in the Air Force. I've known Bill. I have respect for his policy stances. I don't want property taxes. I want IP reform. I think everyone listening wants the same things.
On that, okay. On
and
that
so
topic,
it's not about what the goal is. It's how do you get from here to there? And do you absolutely just turn Senate order and civility on its ear, or do you go through the process and yes, hold people's feet to the fire? I have a problem with why we spend so much time pooping around until the last week and then things happening. I think that's a problem. And that's a valid criticism of the order of the Senate, I think.
When it comes to IP reform, we've gotten a handful of text messages here at the station at 874-9390 over the last couple of weeks from folks just going, what the heck is IP reform?
It isn't the address on your computer, of your personal device.
That's
it's not your IP address.
And it's not intellectual property.
That's a good one.
It is initiative petitions.
Who wants to take that on? Explain this in layman's terms.
And why is it so important to these guys?
What does reform mean, Stephanie?
Okay, we have it's in our state constitution. Not every state has this, but it's basically a reservation to the people, that when the people enacted the state constitution, they reserved to themselves the right to petition and to go around the legislature and go directly to the people to either pass a law, a statutory initiative petition, or a constitutional amendment. You can do both. And it's existed since even before our existing 1945 Constitution, but it's not something that every state has. So it's special. It's a right that people have. And I would say it's used every year. So when you're voting on those issues, let's back up. The legislature can also refer measures.
So there's two ways to get the Constitution amended. The legislature can put something on the ballot, right?
Yes.
Or the people, through a sign this as you're walking into the Mizzou game type of a protocol, can it do that? But what determines the threshold for getting that populist avenue amendment onto the ballot?
There are tons of requirements. The ones they're trying to change are in the Constitution. There are also smaller technical requirements in statutes. Now, what you're going to hear from the liberals is this is all about abortion. Conservatives want to stop any sort of pro-abortion measure and want to change the initiative petition process. That's what we heard in Ohio. What really kicked this off, and if you've been close to the issue, they've been trying to do initiative petition reform for 5 or 6 years, even before Dobbs. So
raise the bar on what's required, because the allegation
of a simple majority.
And John, the truth is that over the past few initiative petition efforts, it's been outside money that has come in and really sort of pushed those issues onto the ballot, right?
Oh, that's the number one thing you hear, especially from the conservative side, is the phrase "out of state dark money."
Well, and so if you really go back and try to look at like when this really kicked off, it's what we have a Republican supermajority. But if you look at some of the things that have come in on the ballot and actually passed, you're looking at things like Medicaid expansion. Mm-hmm. I think that was really the straw that broke the camel's back when they said we have to do something about initiative petition reform. We did Medicaid expansion. Minimum wage is something. And some people say the same for marijuana. That's how we got marijuana. And so how can we have this conservative state and conservative legislature, and yet we're, the liberals are using the initiative petition process to give us these policies, but the people are voting for it. And I think the other thing that they want to reform is, and Brian brings this up a lot, it's about collecting signatures, because you only need to collect signatures in 6 of the 8 congressional districts. So it allows you to basically not have to collect any and ignore 2 of the congressional districts.
Of the 8 federal congressional districts, yeah.
Correct.
Okay, right.
And then also when you vote, and so Brian brings this up a lot about marijuana, the only people who really voted for marijuana were people in the cities. And so everyone else voted against it. And so it's allowing the urban centers to control the state. So there's also been some proposals about you would have to get, a majority in each of the congressional districts or Senate districts, House districts. They've thrown out so many different proposals, and I don't know which one's going to lead the day here. But that's another consideration as they're considering how they might reform the initiative petition process to protect the Constitution from these, supposed out-of-state issues. Now, The problem
then
with
there's
that,
the whole debate over the majority number, whether it should be a simple majority or 57% or 60%. Then you're back to that whole debate.
now the problem with that, and we had this discussion a little bit yesterday, was it's assuming that we're always in the majority. Because it is a tool that should Republicans ever be in a minority, that then we would be able to use to run around a Democrat legislature. And it's been used that way in the past. So if we raise all of the thresholds, it applies equally. And we might not be so happy in 10 years or 20 years when the coins flipped.
I know it's painful when there are things that you yearn for that you want a whole lot, but I'm thinking as a child, we all wanted everything super early, but we learned that sometimes what we wanted wasn't always good for us. And delayed gratification, especially when you talk about weighty matters that affect millions of people's lives in a state like Missouri, with a fabric from urban to rural to suburban to exurban, I'm glad that the process is not to and fro like a toboggan going down, running from side to side, hitting one guardrail and 10 yards later another guardrail. I mean, there's some wisdom in that. That's why these things are set up, to have some, take a pause. Let's not do this, even though it feels bad because we're not getting done as quick as we'd like. What happens later if other people are getting done things quicker than they'd like?
Yeah,
we'd like.
And certainly one of the conversations is specifically around our state constitution. And you look at the strength of the United States Constitution and how few times it's been amended and how short the actual document is. And then you see our state constitution and know how many times it's been amended and how lengthy it is. It's a whole, you can go get a copy of it from the Secretary of State's office. It's a whole little book. And so part of the conversation is as well, maybe we keep the requirements less strict if you're just doing a statutory initiative. And maybe we need to raise the bar to protect the state constitution. 2 years ago, 2022, we voted to see if we wanted to have a constitutional convention and just scrap the whole thing and start over. And I voted in favor, but unfortunately that didn't pass.
Well, but this I think is an argument on the side of the voices of the conservative caucus and people that support them, the Freedom Caucus. Why can't we get these things done? That's a natural high-level question.
I think
it's that important, let's get it done. And I guess the question I would have for Senator Eigel, for Senator Onder, for Senator, who I consider very good friends, as I do Cindy O'Loughlin, is it because Bill Eigel's IP petition process is not getting through and therefore he's not going to approve anyone else's? I don't know the answer. There's been speculation to that. Is it because Senator Eigel's property tax reform won't get through, therefore we're going to filibuster any other property tax reform? You see, this is the question I have as a voter.
Well, and what's interesting is last year, actually, the Senate agreed on initiative petition reform, and it passed out of the Senate, and it was the fact that the House couldn't get consensus, and there wasn't consensus between the two groups. So
that's a good point to bring up. I mean, they did their job last year.
Oh, gosh, go back how many years? What was it, Steph? 2018 and George Soros and Amendment 1, Clean Missouri and all that. And we saw how that all kind of spun in, where the out-of-state, deep pockets money was coming in to influence a minority part of the voters. But with voter turnout being, 60% on a good year, it has a whole lot of impact.
Yeah.
And John, you bring up a great point. I left that one off my list, and certainly that was part of the whole impetus, I think, that started the discussion around initiative petition reform.
Texter Keith says, Caleb Rowden is the problem. Caleb will be on with us at 7:10. He doesn't allow his colleagues to have equal say, but with filibusters and bringing bills to the floor. He is the king of tabling issues. Well, we'll see what his response to that is. I think that's sort of a nice summary of what a lot of critics say. Travis says, I believe every single homeowner would sign off a petition to end property tax. That is how it works.
But the question for that, and Bill Eigel's been asked this question, and I don't know that he has an answer, is then how do you pay for the things that are currently paid for by property tax? I think, one, spending cuts, right?
He says there's, at Gary Nolan's Christmas brunch, I was there.
Okay.
I asked him that question. In fact, I think he talked about it in open, and then when he came around the table, I was sitting at a table and we talked about it. He says there's plenty of money. There's money out there. I remember single-digit million or billion, I don't know, one of the numbers. Big bucks that we could use to fund this from the state. There's the money's there. We have the money in the state. That was basically the answer.
Show me the numbers. You know, and I think in particular, property tax funds a lot of locals. You know, your local, you know, your schools and local districts and ambulance districts and cities and that kind of things. And I think his answer is, well, we're just going to take state money and somehow hold them harmless.
Yeah.
But again, then that state money is being used for something this year. So who are we? What are we taking it away from? Would be my question. And I don't want property tax for sure. But you know, how are we going to get there?
Well, I mean, and again, if you look at the overall tax burden of Missourians, we're low. We're low. However you cut the pie, whether it's income tax this percent and property tax that much and a user fee, our out-of-pocket tax burden as citizens in this state, if you look at we'll find it during the break, it's not high. And so, yeah, I mean, could things be cut? If we're going to cut one place and we already have a low tax burden, do you want to become Arkansas of 40 years ago? You don't want to become Arkansas 40 years ago.
And the people that we're calling rhinos right now have enacted like the most historic tax cuts in the history. I mean, they did a huge tax cut, last year, 2 years ago? I mean, we've had incredible tax cuts over the last 5 years, thanks to a conservative majority.
And Keith is absolutely right. Keith, you're absolutely right. There is no other answer. There is no other discussion. It's the end of the segment in the discussion. You go to a flat tax where everyone pays taxes. Amen, brother. Last word for Keith. You're absolutely right. Whether it's a flat tax or a fair tax, that's the way to go. Well, that's just my opinion. What's yours? 573-874-9390. All right, we're having too much fun here. When we come back, why populism may be harmful to your
Or the app.
the respective apps, or Alexa. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, you can do Alexa too. The apps are pretty slick. YouTube, not Twitter, not yet. Maybe someday. Rumble? We on Rumble? No.
No.
Anyway, Caleb's with us at 7:10. Senate President Pro Tem Caleb Rowden. Cheri Toalson Reisch, she's worked up over the Boone County tax freeze proposal that's on the ballot. We'll find out what that's about. Maybe get her thoughts about what happened in terms of Senate committee appointments per Caleb and yesterday, as well as her anticipation of the governor's State of the State speech today down at the Capitol. Susan Klein from Missouri Right to Life at 8:10. So we have a busy schedule today. A lot of people commenting on taxes. And while I said I love a flat tax, I'm a really ultimately, if I was king, I would do a fair tax. Fair tax. Everyone gets a prebate, so it's not a regressive tax. The fair tax is a tax where it was commissioned by a rich oil guy who just put a bunch of tax people and economists in a room and said, look, everything's on the table. Income, sales, VAT, value added, everything. And they came up with a fair tax. Everyone gets a prebate to where for a family of four, you anticipate toilet paper.
That sounds like universal basic income.
It's fine. That's called a prebate.
Okay.
It's so you don't punish those in a sales tax mode that have low incomes. They're protected. And actually richer people might pay slightly more under this. But if you look at the fair tax and you unpack it, it's a very, very good, it's a very, very nice proposal.
Yeah, and I know, like, it might seem like we're a little bit, or I have an opinion about what's going on right now, but I do want to say, like, when these people, I don't agree with the majority all the time, right? And I think in particular, and I know what we'll hear probably from Cheri Reisch later, and I know she was, an opponent of it, is like the gas tax, right? Like, I was, when they did that, I was very unhappy. I know a lot of our local folks were really unhappy. A lot of our elected representatives here in mid-Missouri, I'm still unhappy about it.
Yeah.
But so I just want to say, like, I don't think they're in the right all the time either. I think on this issue they are, but specifically on some of those issues, you have to compromise. I think what we're going to get for I-70 is probably a good bang for our buck, but it was tough to see them vote for the gas tax, and I'll be honest about that.
Now, listener Steve texted us at 874-9390, and he said, replace property taxes with GoFundMe campaigns and let the people decide what deserve to be funded.
Yeah, nice,
I kind of like that
thought.
idea. But Randy, you bring up a good point too. Not only is Missouri a low tax state, and we've enjoyed some tax cuts recently, but going to other countries and hearing what they pay, it's insane. I mean, some countries in Europe are getting, they're like close to 50%.
Oh, yeah,
and
the Scandinavian countries.
It's a bargain
especially
to live in America, and especially in Missouri.
And their services are terrible.
Right.
And I mean, I talked to some lawyer friends over there, and I'm like, honestly, if I knew the government was taking half, I might stay home. What's the incentive?
It's all about health care over there.
And they have terrible health care and terrible teeth. And they don't have that great health care.
The Democrats say their health care is beautiful. It's wonderful. It's perfect.
It's terrible.
I know.
And the waits are long. I mean, it's just
good for primary care, but when you need something big and bad done, if you need a knee replacement, if you've got a coronary artery problem, if you've got breast cancer, if you've got an eye, macular degeneration, under the National Health Service in the UK, you have to go blind in one eye before you can get the magic shot in the other if you have MD.
Yeah.
Even in Canada, not even just across the pond, but Canada's the same way.
Yep.
I follow a Canadian YouTuber, and he often talks about how, it's nice that you don't have to get a bill, I guess, when you go to the hospital, but they pay out the rear end on their taxes, and there's always super duper long waits at the hospital in the emergency room because everyone goes for anything.
Speaking
when you
of
don't
paying
have to
out
pay
the
for
rear
it,
end
right?
of your taxes, does it cover colonoscopies? Okay, next. Look, populism and uninformed opinion can be dangerous. We're seeing outbreaks of measles, gang, in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Georgia. There's been a precipitous drop in vaccinations.
Are you about to tell me to get a vax?
I'm trying to recommend that I don't want your child to get a measles encephalitis and be essentially cognitively impaired the rest of their life.
Mid-Missouri.
Get ready, pal.
Here's your host, Randy Tobler.
I want to try to remain optimistic. However, it needs to be said that right now, the leadership team of Senator O'Loughlin and Senator Rowden are doing everything they can to move us away from a resolution on these big red, Republican issues. They're threatening to remove us from chairmanships. They're threatening to remove us from committees as a way to try to silence us. No matter what they do, one, that's not going to silence us, and two, that's not going to move us any closer to resolution on these big red policy ideas.
That was Senator Bill Eigel yesterday on the Gary Nolan Show before Senator Caleb Rowden, President Pro Tem of the Missouri Senate, did exactly what Bill Eigel said that you were threatening to do, Caleb Rowden, and he joins us now. Thank you very much for weighing in on this. I think many of us, Senator Rowden, are confused and dismayed, and boy, we'd sure like some clarity on what's going on, what happened yesterday, what motivated it, and what will it mean with getting these conservative issues done this year?
Yeah, good to be with you guys. I think I said it a few times yesterday. I think yesterday was not a response to one or two or three individual things. It was the response and a culmination of, really what has been about 5 years of these guys, a few small select individuals that have really, the best way I could describe it is they intentionally tried to break the Missouri Senate just to claim that the game was rigged against them, right? It's one of the only ways that they have, and particularly Senator Eigel, the only way he has to get any sort of traction with anybody in his gubernatorial campaign, which is clearly what this is all about. He cares not about the Senate. He cares not actually about passing these issues. We've had 16 and a half hours of, this was before yesterday, which added to this particular stat. We've had 16 and a half hours of floor debate in the Missouri Senate this year. Those guys have been holding the floor for 15 hours and 40 minutes. So the notion that anyone other than Bill Eigel and Denny Hoskins and Rick Bratton and a few others are in charge of or responsible for us not getting, to these big things, these conservative things, is crazy. And we've got stats and statistics to back it up. So it's the culmination of years of disrespect towards colleagues, years of disrespect towards the Senate, and frankly, years of intentionally trying to break the Senate. And so, we thought it was necessary to take action, and we're hopeful that this will be the beginning of a movement toward working toward issues. Right? I've told everybody, I don't care if you have disagreements with me on issues. If you're filibustering a piece of policy that I care about, that's what the Senate's all about. If you're hijacking the Senate to try to do Cindy O'Loughlin's job for her, or say you will only do this or nothing else will happen, well, when 18 other members of your caucus say no, this is what happens, and they're going to have to learn a lesson here, or this is going to be a really, really bad session for them, and it's not going to end the way that they think it's going to.
So tell us what the issue. So now the issue has changed over time, but now the issue that you're blocking apparently is initiative petition reform. But we've heard that I think initiative petition reform got out of the Senate last year. What was the breakdown last year with initiative petition reform, and where is it now? We've heard there are 12 bills pending.
Yeah, good question. So last year, the Senate passed a bill, the House passed a bill. The Senate's version was kind of a mixture of two ideas: the raising of the threshold that it would take to pass a constitutional amendment, and a concurrent majority saying that you've got to get a simple majority in a majority of congressional districts. So our bill kind of combined that. The House's bill, if I remember correctly, just had the threshold increase in it. And so like is the case on, any number of things, in a normal session, the House and the Senate had disagreements. We got to conference. And then at the end of session, those guys blew the place up. They didn't like where things were headed. And so they stood in the way of a bunch of stuff. They stood in the way of property tax relief. They stood in the way of sports betting. They stood in the way of IP reform getting done. And that was their fault entirely. They held the floor. Anybody that goes back and listens, they held the floor for the better part of the last 2 days. So IP reform dying last year was a combination of just normal House and Senate disagreements, and the conservative caucus, the chaos caucus, whoever they are, deciding that they were going to blow the place up. This year we have, a bunch of bills filed, all the SJRs. We were planning on referring those SJRs a week ago Monday, and they took the floor and began this process that culminated in partly in what you saw yesterday, and wouldn't let us even get to the place where I could refer. I get to refer the bills. I didn't even get there. I couldn't get there. I couldn't refer them if I wanted to, because they held the floor for 15 hours and 45 minutes out of 16 and a half hours. So I have told them, and the deal, I told them last night, even after all of this went down, the deal is still on the table. We want to get our slate of gubernatorial appointments, which is where we were in the process when everything started to go crazy. Nobody special on there. A former senator colleague of mine, Dan Hageman, is a tremendous guy, is on there to go on the Highway Commission. All the rest of them are, for the most part, volunteers who have just signed up to serve the state, and these guys are standing in front of them being confirmed. And if they don't let them go, then these people die forever and can never serve in any capacity ever again. It's one of the most childish, foolish things I've ever seen in the Senate. So my deal to them is, if you let that slate go, I'm going to refer every bill I've got, including every IP reform bill, education reform, tax reform, all the things that we want. Everything gets referred today, as long as they let those gubernatorial appointments go, and then we can get back to normal. We can go to committee and let the process play out the way that it always does.
Do you anticipate that they will, in fact, approve those gubernatorial appointments?
I mean, we'll see. I think, they have a habit. They've done this for the last 5 years because they're not very good at this. They dig themselves halfway into a hole, and then they used to come to Dave Schatz and I, or they come to Cindy O'Loughlin and I, and they ask us to fix their problem. It's a poorly concocted plan from the beginning of this. They decided to aim their fire at a group of civil servants, public servants that just want to figure out a way to serve their community in these boards and committees that are generally not a lot of fun and generally don't pay anything. So they aimed their fire in the wrong direction, and they looked like idiots in the process, if I'm being honest. And now they're trying to ask me to concoct some way to give them a win. Well, here's the win. Everybody, you get what you want. I'll refer all these bills, which I was going to do anyway before they decided to stand up and make noise. And we get our gubernatorial appointments, and that's what business as usual, back to normal order looks like. So they have the opportunity to do that today and every day going forward. If they decide that they want to do the right thing for a change, then I will gladly get these IP bills referred. And my assumption is, if they get referred today, the bills probably get heard at the beginning of next week, and we can get the ball rolling on some of these things that we care about.
Senator, we appreciate you joining us. I have a question about Bill Eigel's comments afterwards, and I'll get to that in a moment. But a real quick question about what you said about the appointments. If Robert Nodell at DSS, Department of Social Services, and Paula Nicholson at Department of Health are on that list, are you saying if they're not confirmed by the end of January, they cannot serve, or how would that work with those two?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the resolution is, if we aren't able to take action on them, then they will be banned for life from serving in those roles. If the governor were to withdraw them and that withdrawal was accepted by the Senate, which is an action that we have to take separately, then they could, the governor could reappoint them, and then we would have till the end of session to get them done. Every appointment that happens in the interim has to be done by the end of January or 30 days after we get there. Every appointment that happens in session, we have till the end of session to do. But if that happens, then they would no longer be able to serve in their capacities. If he has to reappoint them during session, they would have to leave the job and then leave those obviously very, very important departments without a leader in the last year of a Parson administration, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. And frankly, I think it's one of the more selfish, just not well thought out. There's other words I could say, but one of the craziest things I've ever seen in the Senate. These guys have no clue what they're doing. They don't know where to aim their fire. They need to have an enemy, to help their politics. And on any given day, they don't know who their enemy is.
And I want to follow up on that. That's great information. It's brand new, and I'm glad because we have a lot of people that work at DSS and also Department of Health, so they'd be interested. They'd be interested in that. Senator Eigel did send me a statement after you removed him from his chairmanship, and I won't read the whole thing. It's a paragraph. People can read it, obviously, on his website. But I'm going to read 2 sentences here. But this is, I think, the most important thing to me of what he said here about his removal. Quote, Senator, Jefferson City, and this is Senator Bill Eigel speaking here, Jefferson City, quote, is ruled by a uniparty cartel of special interest rhinos and Democrats who band together to crush the voice of the people. These are the same tactics the swamp uses against President Trump. They can strip me of my chairmanship. They can kick me off committees. They can drag my name through the mud. I am not backing down. They think this punishment will somehow deter me, but I am freer now than I have ever been. I don't work for the swamp. End of quote. Senator, your response to that?
Well, Bill Eigel is not Donald Trump. I know that for certain. I think additionally, the notion that, these guys they've started the Freedom Caucus, which is a national organization. They literally get calls daily from people in Virginia that tell them what to do, tell them what actions to take, tell them to hold the floor or not hold the floor. If that's not the swamp, I'm not sure what is, if I'm being honest. The other thing is, there's nothing that happened yesterday that won't allow us to continue to move forward if these guys will put their egos aside and actually be aimed and focused at the issues that we all want to get done. I said it to Senator Eigel on the floor yesterday. We are, 95% of this is about process, right? And he gets to try and decide. He wants to try and make them out to be the martyrs in this situation. And in doing so, they've killed any number of really, really important conservative policies over the last number of years. And so, there's a reason why every poll that's come out has him at 4%. It's because he's talking to the same people over and over again. And the rest of the people either aren't listening or don't really think his message is worth listening to. And so, I think, he can do whatever he wants to do. He has a tremendous power and prerogative as a senator to do any number of things, but the notion that that I'm the one that's and our side the ones the swamp when these guys are taking their marching orders daily, from some outfit in D.C. I think is pretty swampy, and it's kind of par for the course what you've seen in D.C. Matt Gaetz removes Kevin McCarthy, you get Mike Johnson, who I think is a really nice man and doing the best job he possibly can, but the outcomes that you're getting with this new speaker that these guys thought was, going to be the savior is the exact same as what you got with Kevin McCarthy, and that's what happens when you have a three or four seat majority, a Democrat Senate, Democrat president. These guys aren't able to put anything in context, and it's either because they are not intelligent enough to do it, or they just don't care, and they're willing to lie to voters on a day-to-day basis to help move a political narrative. But it is hurting the Republican Party and our ability to tell voters, everyday regular voters that go to work and come home and eat with their families, that Republicans can govern. And if we don't fix that, and if these guys don't allow that to be fixed, we're going to lose majorities everywhere, including at some point in Missouri.
Well, there's Senator Caleb Rowden in the middle of a sadly breaks your heart controversy in the GOP side conference in the Missouri Senate. Hopefully this will send strong messages, Caleb, and hopefully people will come to their senses and get some things done. And I think now, as I shared with the audience earlier, now I think the binoculars are clearly on the Republican side of the Senate to make sure that something does get done in the wake of these moves. Your assessment, just overall, rough picture, 50-50 chance, 75-25 of getting IP reform, education choice, some tax reform. What's the chance of getting one or more of those done?
I think everything's still possible. Percentages I've learned in the Senate don't do me a tremendous amount of good, but I think everything's still possible. We refer all these, if we do get to refer all these bills today, we're
right? I mean, come on. We had to.
Yeah, it's kind of a big day.
That was pretty hot. So you get credit for part of Caleb Rowden's hot segment on your What's Hot with Hannah. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay, good.
I'm not sure
John,
how that works.
makes sense to you, doesn't it?
Works for me.
Now, Randy, I thought you might appreciate today's What's Hot with Hannah story because it involves sperm donors.
Oh.
And, you know, in your line of work,
Yes.
you've got history with maybe not sperm. Okay.
Wait a minute. Let's be careful here. I have never donated.
Yeah, sorry.
But as part of
he gave it the office.
As part of infertility treatment, some couples opt for various reasons, and other women who don't have partners will opt for sperm donation. Now, okay.
Yeah,
so
sorry,
let's set that very straight there.
I wasn't
My wife may
trying
be
to
listening.
make it sound any other way.
God forbid if there were a bunch of little Randys running around, it would not be good for society.
There was a 24-year-old
Yeah.
who has gone viral lately because she found out that she's got a pretty big family.
Yeah.
She did the 23andMe sort of DNA ancestry test, the one where you swab your cheek, fill up a vial with some saliva, you mail it off, and several weeks later you get this report of your ancestry. They look at your DNA, and if other, familial relations have done the test, they can kind of link you to other family members you might not have known about. This girl grew up thinking that she had one sister, and turns out she did not know that she was the product of an anonymous sperm donor. And over the last 2 years, she has found more than 200 half-siblings because this donor, I guess, has been very
donating.
active. Yeah. And I guess even though she's 24, he's still donating, or his donation is still out there. So it could be more than 200.
in the break there. We have to turn on. Are you paying the heating bills, Producer Hannah?
Oh, shoot.
John, would you please make sure they're paying the heating bills at Zimmer? Did you do that?
Duly noted.
Thank you. Brian Hauswirth over there. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fine. I agree with Stephanie. It is a little chillier.
Well, you're
this
wearing
morning.
a short sleeve shirt for crying out loud.
I've got my Mr. Rogers sweater in the newsroom that I do have.
We got to get that posted to the Facebook page. It's pretty epic.
Yeah, it's something. It's from 1997, and it's wonderful. It's keeping me
It's a
warm.
lovely day in the neighborhood.
Glad to hear you don't throw away stuff, too. I'm wearing ties from the 90s still.
Exactly.
Well,
It depends on what it is, but yeah, absolutely.
You guys, if you're cold, just go sit in the corner because it's always 90 degrees there.
You're right. Joining us now, State Representative Cheri Reisch, and she has. We want to talk about the Boone County property tax freeze issue, which I know is hot on your plate, Cheri, but also get your thoughts on what's going on in the Missouri Senate and maybe a look ahead to the governor's speech today on the state of the state. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be on, Randy. Thank you for inviting me. I can't be in the studio because I have to be at a committee meeting at 8 in the Capitol this morning. First, I was shocked when the news release came out yesterday that the Boone County Commission has now suddenly decided to put this question on the April ballot. And I have a lot of problems with that. I sent out my own press release yesterday. I sent it to Brian Hauswirth there. And there's a lot of problems with this. Their language says certain taxes, whereas my ballot says all taxes. Also, they've been against this in spirit in the fact that they're waiting on a dysfunctional General Assembly to try to make improvements to it or clarifications to it. I am running on what we have now and what the current law is. I plan to continue to gather signatures, and so anyone who hasn't signed mine yet, please contact me. We've got to get tax relief for these seniors on fixed incomes.
So the ballot language is very vague, and I guess it would give a lot of leeway to commissioners to decide how much or what district property tax maybe to freeze and another one not to freeze. Was that what you're saying?
Yeah, so to me, the commission is doing it backwards. Number one, it's the Nancy Pelosi, let's pass this bill, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with it. Then they're going to have public comments and public hearings. Why didn't they have public comments and public hearings before they decided to put it on the ballot? Why did they put it on an April ballot when there's a low voter turnout and it may get defeated? But I just don't. When I sent an email to the county commission way back in August that what I was going to do and why, because they were too wishy-washy and couldn't make a decision. They could have done this last year, but the most important key here, Randy and listeners, is they do not have to put it before the voters, have an election expense. They can vote on their own. They were elected to do their job, and they're not voting to do it automatically. And I just am suspicious. I don't like it. And they don't like my bill because it says all taxing entities.
Well, I want to follow up on that, and you're correct. You did send me a release. I want to point out two things about what you said. This is a very fascinating issue. Number one, Representative, to try to write a summary of what you're talking about, I guarantee it's going right over a lot of people's heads because it's very complicated. It is and it isn't, but because there's two things. To try to sum that up in a 15-second story is darn near impossible. It's very difficult to do. But I think the most important thing that we need to emphasize, yes, they want to put it on the April ballot, but that does not preclude you from working to get it on the August or November ballot. That will make it even more confusing. And so we could have two elections this year on this.
Correct, and that's why I'm moving forward. In fact, my phone and emails have been blowing up thinking, oh, congrats, Cheri, you got the commission to put it on the ballot. And I'm like, no. They did this, no public notice, no public hearing. They didn't even tell me they were doing it, and I've been in full contact with them and open and transparent, and they have not been transparent. And I don't believe they're going to do what people think they're going to do, and what they think will happen is not going to happen.
Has Kip Kendrick made a public
moving forward.
Has Kip Kendrick made a public statement in response to this? We need to get him on and see if he'll do that and find out what's up.
All I saw was their press release.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know we could get Randy. We should get him on. It'd be good.
We'll do that. We'll try to get him on. Okay.
And they'll just be wishy-washy and vague. They're not going to give you direct answers.
So if people
I never ride the fence, and I'll tell you like it is.
Yeah, well, that's never been a problem of yours, being wishy-washy and vague. John Marsh has a question for you, Cheri.
Well, Cheri, I know there was debate at the Capitol when this whole issue went through, and it eventually ended up as that Senate bill. That it wasn't just seniors they talked about; it was everybody trying to freeze property taxes on folks, and that didn't get a lot of traction, did it?
No, and in fact, there's a lot of misinformation out there. People think you have to be on Social Security, and that is false. You have to be Social Security age being the key word, eligible, which is 62. You know, a lot of people are not on Social Security at 62 or above. So they're worried, oh, well, this won't affect teachers' retirement or other pension retirements. Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Okay.
They want to read into it what they want to read.
So if people, if folks would like to sign your initiative petition process, how do they contact you?
They can call my cell phone, 573-881-3885. My email is creisch@aol.com. I think I'm pretty easily found around Boone County, so I don't care if they want to come knock on my door at my house.
Clearly, Cheri, the fissure has absolutely turned it into a chasm between factions in the GOP and the Missouri Senate. Your thoughts on what happened yesterday with, stripping of committee chairmanships reminds me of the old series Brandit, where they ripped the star off of his sleeve and then taking away parking spaces. I mean, is this going to be helpful or net hurtful to the cause?
Hurtful. It is not helpful at all. I listened to the entire press release Senator Rowden gave, and then I heard the response from the three men that were kicked off committees. And what disturbed me was Denny Hoskins said they've never even talked to them. They've never sat down. We need Senate leadership to get in a room, lock the door, and sit down with these people and work these things out. We are a supermajority, and we can't get Republican things done. I am so mad. We couldn't get IP reform done last year. We did in the House. We couldn't get education reform done in the Senate. We did in the House. It is so frustrating. We get our job done in the House to go die in the Senate. And we had a Boone County Republican Central Committee last night, and it was proposed a person is going to write a letter to Senator Rowden as a vote of no confidence from his own constituents of Boone County in his leadership abilities.
But whose fault is it not getting the things done in the Senate? We just heard from Senator Rowden that, the conservative caucus blew up and held the floor of the Senate last year. And so he blames them. I think they blame him. In your opinion, is it?
It's both. They need to work it out. But again, look at people's ratings. If you're a Republican conservative, they even have a sign the pledge that you will follow the Republican platform. And we have too many people in the House and the Senate that are not Republicans, do not talk like Republicans, and do not vote like Republicans. Look at people's voting records. Facts are facts. In fact, I texted Senator Rowden early yesterday morning. I had no idea this was going on. I had no idea what was going to happen yesterday. And I told him in my text, if we can't get IP reform done now, emphasis on now, we will have abortion in the Constitution, and it falls on his shoulders in his leadership position. He's the president. Let's get the job done.
Now, okay, so, and I noticed you were talking about scorecards. I noticed AFP, Americans for Prosperity, put out some grades yesterday, and it didn't seem like all of the conservative caucus members were on that. So what scorecard do you want us to look at?
So there's the American Conservative Union. I tied for the second most conservative female in the House. In the entire building. I've been in the top one or two for the last many years. But you can just, there's another scorecard that's on my Facebook page. I can't think of the name of it. And again, you can see who your senator and representatives on conservative values, on conservative votes, where they landed.
Now,
it's in black and white.
When they announced this new Freedom Caucus this year, it was going to be members of the House and the Senate, and that were going to join this caucus. So is there any sort of formation of a Freedom Caucus in the House, and is that something you're interested in joining, or how do you see that playing out?
I have heard secondhand there might be a few House members also aligned with the Freedom Caucus. I am not been asked to be. I'm not a part of it. I can be my own person and let my voice and my vote speak for myself.
What are your thoughts about the governor's speech today? I imagine they did some text rewrites overnight after what the goings on of yesterday. Can he be a bridge builder, a fence mender, or is it just going to be, let's just talk about my priorities and let the kids play in the sandbox?
I don't know what the governor's going to say or do, but I can tell you the budget is the most important thing. The governor's come out with his budget. The House, where the budget actually originates, we started way back in December before we even were back in session. And so depending on what the governor has to say today, part of it may be thrown out the window, and we may have to start from scratch. Kudos to our budget chairman, Cody Smith. He knows the numbers and he knows what money we have, and that's the one thing by Constitution is we must pass a balanced budget, even if we can't do anything else. And it looks like we maybe won't get anything else done again. In the minute
we have left, John Marsh, you had a question for Cheri.
Cheri, where do you think this is all going? I know we heard Caleb Rowden, point the fingers and talk about people's languishing campaigns with Andrew Koenig running for treasurer and Hoskins and Bill Eigel and all. I know he's right in the midst of it, too. I mean, Rowden's running for Secretary of State. Do you see anything happening in this political year?
Here's my wish for today. They can get the Senate confirmations done on all of those people that volunteer their time or work for State departments. Let's get them confirmed. Let's do their job and then move forward and extend an olive branch and sit down and talk to each other face to face, man to man, or woman to woman. Let's get her done now.
Okay. Well, I like the get her done attitude. Let's see if that can permeate through over to the Senate side, and then the governor sign what's passed and get some unanimity here. Cheri, as always, appreciate your authenticity and your go-getter style. Thanks very, very much. Appreciate it. All right. Cheri Toalson Reisch. Wow. John?
Sir?
There's a lot of out-of-the-box stuff happening, but it's real life. I'm sure you've got some real life coming up.
A history lesson. repeatedly struck Representative Matthew Lyon of Vermont with a cane, angered by the man's failure to expel Lyon for spitting tobacco juice at him. Lyon defended himself with a pair of fireplace tongs, though the resolution to expel both men from the chamber had failed. One of the most famous acts of congressional violence, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina attacked Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts with a cane May 22nd, 1856, bloodying him and nearly killing him because of Sumner's anti-slavery crime against Kansas speech. And Congressman B1 Bob Dornan, remember B1 Bob? Mm-hmm. Accused Representative Tom Downey grabbing him by the shoulder in 1985 after Dornan gave a speech calling him a draft-dodging wimp. Dornan grabbed him by the collar of the shirt and said he was just straightening the knot in his tie so he could look elegant. Dornan, the same guy who called out fellow Republican Steve Gunderson a few years later, accusing him of having a, quote, revolving door on his closet. Now you know the rest of that story.
Well, you think
or
about
stories.
You think about the mayhem that we see overseas, in various, Eastern Bloc and other countries when they have their general assemblies. I mean, things, fisticuffs breaking out, and it's pretty active over in Parliament too. So there's precedent for legislative bodies getting active.
Well, how about Andrew Jackson and his, well-known pouncing on people and duels and everything else?
Yeah, it sounds like we got to figure out a way to settle this. And even among our business bros, weren't Elon and Mark Zuckerberg going to go to a cage fight or something? And there was a physical altercation last year, I think, where people had to be separated in the state capitol. I think it was in the hallway.
Oh, yeah. I heard some rumblings about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember once back in the day when Bob Griffin was House Speaker, came into the Speaker's office to meet up with his son and go have lunch. And there were members of the Black Caucus in there, one of them holding an ice pack to his face in the outer office, and they'd gotten into it and tangled in the Speaker's office, and the House Speaker at the time was none too happy with his colleagues.
We're getting a lot of activity on the text line at 573-874-9390. And first of all, even though we may disagree, and we may disagree vociferously, I'm thankful people are weighing in.
Vociferously.
Vociferously.
Your vocabulary word for the day.
Isn't that a good word for the day?
Is.
Vociferously? No?
What does it mean?
Vigorously. Aggressively.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got to dumb things down for me sometimes,
No,
Randy.
I don't. No, I don't. I elevate you to the highest lofty levels. Now,
oh, boy.
But people are, I think everyone's struggling, and none of us know what's going on in the discussions. I'm seeing texts that say, if Caleb would just sit down with people. You think Caleb hasn't tried to sit down? Maybe Eigel and company have a point that maybe Cindy and Caleb need to crack the whip a little bit more on their so-called moderate colleagues and get things moving quicker.
The thing I'd like to see, though, is,
there this
And my
morning?
17 beverages. Yes. Good morning.
But you are sans your light. Where's your beautiful
I
energy
need to turn
light?
on
You
my
don't have your energy light. Here it is.
Okay.
We've had a lot of energy without an energy light. Hannah, you're full of energy this morning.
Am I?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I am.
I can't even share with the audience what energetic double entendres you did off air. Oh, John.
My head lives
John,
in
you
the
would
gutter.
blush. You would blush.
Whatever.
Oh, precious.
Never.
Oh, innocent little producer Hannah. I can't.
I've been corrupted by this business over the last 5 years, so I blame everyone else. Yeah.
Well, a not corrupt and a very noble goal and cause is Missouri Right to Life. Susan Klein is in studio and joins us now. How you doing, Susan? Thanks for being with us.
I'm doing great, Randy. Glad to be with you today.
I was inspired to see, despite the blizzard, we saw football coaches. We saw Speaker Mike Johnson come out for the National March for Life last week in D.C. That was inspiring. And then, of course, we've had the National Right to Life Convention. You were at that, right?
I was.
Tell us about it.
It was a great weekend. Very cold, but a lot of great people.
Was Mike Johnson's revelation that he was a product of an unplanned but ultimately wanted teen pregnancy, was that news, or did I miss it along the way?
I think he's been more open about it just recently, but that was great that he can share that story and that we have him as the U.S. Speaker of the House.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. We have to ask you what your thoughts are with the Right to Life movement in Missouri and what kind of traction or not as it relates to IP reform and anything related to the movement, some of the obstacles that we may see given what's going on in the Missouri Senate.
Well, IP reform, we need to get done. We have needed to get it done for the last several years. I don't think that, obviously the Senate has had an issue, but I don't think the Freedom Caucus is to blame, as some might say. I think there's plenty of blame to go around, but the Freedom Caucus is standing up for the issues of right to life. And we appreciate what they're doing. If you look at some in leadership that are working against IP reform, and even though it appears that they, and they say that they are, those of us in the Capitol know exactly what is happening with IP reform, and the supporters of Senate leadership basically agree that no bill passed is better than a bill with pro-life language on it. So I think, I come back to what Brian said yesterday, is that, we have 24 Republicans in the Missouri State Senate, and Republicans across the state of Missouri are looking for the Senate to take hold of their leadership and the supermajorities and move IP reform forward.
Susan, I know you've made a big deal, your organization, out of cautioning folks when somebody comes up to them at one of the big box stores with a clipboard. Make sure you know what you're signing off on, especially as it applies to this whole issue.
Right. And Missouri Right to Life has been working on this issue for over a year and a half. Once we saw what was happening, in other states after Dobbs overturned Roe, we began, a life coalition of over 200 members of organizations across the state of Missouri and activists and working on Decline to Sign. We've seen our Secretary of State and our AG fight the battle in the courts. Our lawyers and other lawyers have been in the courts as well. And, the decline to sign is absolutely important. People should not be signing something on the sidewalk that they don't know what it is. And this IP will put abortion on demand, all 9 months of pregnancy, into our Missouri Constitution. And, they talk about we've taken away their freedom for reproductive rights. In this initiative petition, they're going to take away our freedom for parents to protect their minor daughters. They're going to take away our freedom for women to be able to sue anybody who harms them in an abortion. They're taking away our freedom to have regulations on, what kind of health services people receive in these clinics. So, there's a lot at stake here. This is an extreme pro-abortion movement across the United States that we're seeing, and they're going to send in big money. Our Life Coalition is going to fight against them with big money. We're going to fight with our boots on the ground. We have great pro-life Missourians. Missouri is a pro-life state, and we will show the abortion industry that Missouri Right to Life in Missouri will not fall down and let abortion go into our Constitution.
If people want to find out more about your efforts, where can they go?
We have a tip line that we have created so that people can let us know if you see a signature gather. We have coordinators in all 114 counties and other people, multiple counties, multiple coordinators. So the tip line, if you want to call and let us know, and we'll get a person there holding a sign, declined to sign, is 417-413-4134. You can also go to our website, MissouriLife.org, and we've got a lot of information there for you to read about how deceptive these initiative petitions are.
Susan, a question that keeps recurring, I think, in my conversations with listeners and in my mind is about what we've seen on the ground in Kansas and Ohio as it relates to what we may be looking at here in Missouri, where for lack of an alternative, albeit more moderate but yet popular proposal to at least put solid restrictions on abortion, that we may end up getting the very worst. In other words, what is your response to people that say, look, where's the initiative petition from the pro-life side saying let's allow something with a few exceptions, but at least to put some throttle on it, because the alternative of the enemy of better being best could end up with nothing and the worst. What do you say?
You can see the disagreement in the pro-abortion movement. They're not. They've tasted victory. They have seen in 7 states that they can have abortion on demand with no restrictions, and they're not going to take restrictions. So whatever you offer them is not going to help. Our laws in Missouri have life of the mother and emergency exception. They allow for women to get the help that they need. So offering them something else is not going to make them go away. So that is not something that Missouri Right to Life is supporting. It's not something that we're going to support with legislators doing. So I think we fight this battle and we fight it to win. And because, the other side wants it all. It's all or nothing for them. And what we are doing as compassionate, pro-life, conservative, people is basically working to make sure that women have the help that they need through pregnancy resource centers, through alternatives to abortion funding, Show Me Healthy Babies funding, insurance programs that the state has put together. So I think we work to help women find what they need and meet their needs rather than saying, oh, let's just, water down our pro-life laws. So I don't think that the other side's not going to accept it, and I don't think we should go down that path.
I agree. Well, talk to us a little bit more about you. You mentioned your legislative work. You have other pro-life legislative priorities for this session. Obviously, there's been some issues in the Senate, but if things were to go perfectly, what are those other pro-life priorities that you hope see either a hearing or, getting to the finish line?
Well, we've been working for years to defund Planned Parenthood. And some would say, well, why are we trying to do that? Because there are no abortions being done in the state of Missouri. But you'll see, I think, and it'll come out in a hearing today, there's videos out there that show Planned Parenthood in Missouri, working to take minors across state lines without their parents knowing about it. So defunding Planned Parenthood, Planned Parenthood is an affiliated organization. So all these Planned Parenthoods in different states are affiliated with the national organization, the largest abortion provider in the United States. So defunding Planned Parenthood became an issue back in June of 2020 when the Missouri Supreme Court said that our Missouri legislature could not defund Planned Parenthood any longer in the budget bills, that they need to put it in statute. So we're working to try to get that done. It's very important that pass. That's been out there for several years. And I come back to, again, we're looking at the Republicans who are listening to and taking money from those who say, no bill is better than a bill that has pro-life language in it. So we're working to defund Planned Parenthood. That's something that has been needed to be done. 2021, the Senate adjourned sine die in a special session without putting pro-life protective language in statute. They didn't come back and do it in 22. They didn't come back and do it in 23. And we're asking them to do it in 24.
Susan Klein from Missouri Right to Life joins us this morning on Wake Up Mid-Missouri. How do listeners' tax dollars fund Planned Parenthood currently in Missouri?
It comes through our Medicaid program. And so Planned Parenthood receives, I know in June of 2020, when the court ruled against our pro-life language, they also said, okay, so now you have to pay the money back that we've given Planned Parenthood over a few years. That was 2018, 2019. And that was about $1.3 million. So, Planned Parenthood is not just undermining parental consent or parental knowledge on the abortion issue. They're also doing it on transgender transitioning. So, to continue to give Planned Parenthood money in the state of Missouri is undermining parental authority in multiple ways. So, through the Medicaid program, but since we can't defund them in the budget any longer, we need to do it in statute, and that's what we're trying to do. And so far, the Senate leadership has stalled us out of being able to get this legislation passed.
Susan, many pro-life doctors that deal with women's health are very concerned, and we've heard anecdotal stories, where administrators at hospitals have transferred patients who are having miscarriages, but there may be a very faint heartbeat, and there's debate over what do we wait till the mother is in the ICU? Do we wait till she's requiring a blood transfusion? The whole definition about that exception of the life of the mother is a real pragmatic problem. I can tell you that from very personal knowledge of this. Is the Right to Life movement open to some kind of more clarity on exactly what is and what is not allowable? Because I'm telling you, there are women whose lives are threatened because things are allowed to go because you have, quote, a heartbeat, whereas the woman's life, if left until the very last minute, may actually be threatened. There's things that evolve over relatively short periods of time, and decisions, had they been made earlier to terminate the pregnancy, would have avoided a serious threat to the life of the woman.
The Attorney General's office has come out and talked about what is allowed under life of the mother, what is not allowed. And our laws are absolutely very clear. We looked at that whenever each of those laws were passed over the last 50 years, on care for a woman. I'm a survivor of an ectopic pregnancy. I know that there is help there to give to women if there is an emergency situation. So I think if there's situations where physicians feel, that they don't have that right to do that, then yes, let's sit down and talk to them. But at this point in time, what we've seen and what we have heard from the lawyers is that the doctors have the right to treat a woman if there's a medical
Don't trust
emergency.
the lawyers. The doctors. The doctors don't trust the lawyers because the lawyers are about litigating. But when you're on the ground in the emergency room, and someone presents with a problem that has a 99% chance, not 100, 99% chance of threatening the life of the mother,
then
if you don't act quicker.
Choice.
But doctors don't want to take the chance that someone's going to prosecute them.
They needed to get some chutzpah.
The Attorney General needs to have a hotline 24/7 and say, "What do I do?" There needs to be a doctor in the line who will protect them. I'm telling you, it's a cluster, and I'm a pro-life guy, but I can tell you, it would behoove
A great year so far for the markets, and this morning all the futures are in the green pretty significantly. S&P up about 0.5%, NASDAQ more than that, Dow just slightly under that as the market prepares to open. We are business news is kind of slow. I think we got so much political news right now. The business news writers are slow because I like to check out the Wall Street Journal, what the number one story is, and you would be absolutely shocked at what your bankers
I couldn't believe it
are reading this morning, what your business bros
in the journal,
because it says most popular news. So whatever y'all are clicking on, the Wall Street Journal tells on you and tells that this is the number one story for today. So you think, are they reading about, the Netflix, I guess Netflix got the WWE contract, so that's a big deal. Are they reading about Disney? Are they reading about China? Nope. Number one story, polyamory.
All right.
The headline is polyamory. Lots of sex, even more scheduling. And it goes through this woman's relationship with her husband and how they make it work. So if you're into that,
talk about your investments, huh?
Yeah.
Are we going to have that upside down pineapple discussion again?
Let's not go there.
A lot of deposits happening there.
So
not to mention withdrawals.
All right. So what we are
talking about investments, of course.
I'm going to steal this from Hannah because I had sent it to her because we are going to get to some business news, and this is on Fox Business. So if you happen to have multiple partners and date nights are breaking your bank, you should have gotten in on Applebee's date night pass, which sold out because Applebee's was selling.
What is that?
It was a 52 date night pass. You could get to go to Applebee's, which who's going on a date once a week, honestly?
Wow, no.
And
people who don't have kids.
Maybe. But you were allowed. So they were selling it for just $200. They said it was a $1,500 value. No one apparently knows anybody who actually got a hold of one of these because they sold out so fast. But they would allow you $30 in food and non-alcoholic beverages. Can you get a meal like for under $30 for two people?
Maybe at McDonald's.
Well, yeah.
Not at Applebee's.
I'm thinking maybe it was a smart play because it'd pay for one person, but then they're getting the money from the alcohol and the second person.
Missouri. And on the national scene yesterday, a primary took place in New Hampshire.
Sure did. And
Donald Trump won said primary by, what is it now, 11 or 12 percentage points?
Last time I looked, it was 12.
Okay.
Yeah, 54 to 43.
Okay.
Percent.
11.
Okay.
Well, we're at 11.
Well, let's take off our shoes and count our fingers and toes. Here's what Nikki Haley said when it was about 8% last night, with just 25% of the vote in or something. Here's what she had to say, if I can do this correctly.
You can't fix the mess if you don't win an election. You want to win. A Trump nomination is a Biden win and a Kamala Harris presidency. I defeat Biden handily.
So she makes a point. If you look at the polls in a theoretical Haley versus Biden election, John, she beats Trump. Now, when Trump in his speech said that the polls say the opposite. I don't know. The polls I've looked at suggest that Nikki is right. Now, should she have said she was somehow a winner? That's what Donald Trump said she said, but she didn't say she was a winner. She just said, look at me as someone who can win. What do you think?
She was very optimistic, more optimistic than maybe I thought she should be. But there's been a lot of comeback kids who didn't have great nights in the first primaries and did well. I don't think that's the path that she's on. You know, they go to Nevada and then South Carolina. It's a full month. It's going to take a lot of resources, and the polling looks worse for her in South Carolina than New Hampshire. So, I don't see a path forward for her. I actually put out on my Instagram yesterday, you can find me at Radio Lawyer, a little mini poll and said, does she drop out tonight, tomorrow morning, or is she in it for the long haul? And amongst my followers, people were evenly split. Completely evenly split. And I really thought maybe I didn't think she would drop out last night, but I thought maybe she would come to her senses today and say, look, it's not there for me. But she's making it sound like she's in it for the long haul. Now we heard. It
does. We heard what she get like $1.5 million in her campaign coffers just since DeSantis dropped out over the weekend.
Yeah, she's got plenty of money to keep it going. But we also heard from DeSantis there at the end that he was in it to win it, and it's interesting. I have to laugh because I think all of the press releases and tweets I've seen over the last 24 hours from the Freedom Caucus say, we will never back down. And I'm like, interesting choice of words, since that's what Ron DeSantis was saying. And that was the title of his PAC, and he backed down. So I would have chosen different words. But regardless of word choice, I think at this point, there's no path forward for her.
Except as vice president, Karl Rove thinks it would be a wonderful thought.
Donald Trump is never picking her. I'll go on record saying
Ronald
that.
Reagan picked George H.W. Bush after they had a fairly down-and-out battle back in 1980. So, there's something to be said there. And look, 30% of Haley voters say they would not vote for Trump come hell or high water.
And most Trump voters said they would never vote for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, and I do think, I do agree with Stephanie. I don't see former President Trump taking, and you bring up a very good point. You bring up 1980, George, and really it was more of a geography thing than anything. Ronald Reagan was from California. He wanted somebody from the South. George Bush was from Texas, and he had the West and the South and did very well. Gerald Ford, who was from Michigan, ended up taking Bob Dole in 1976. It used to be more geography, but I think that it's a different era of politics, both federally and locally as well, as we've heard in a couple of our interviews. I want to mention something very, very quickly, guys. We've just had a Columbia doctor just moments ago pretty well-known doctor here in town get indicted by a federal grand jury. I just got an email from the U.S. Attorney's Office. 52-year-old Cheri Brueggemann has been charged in a 13-count indictment returned by a federal grand jury in Kansas City, indicted by a federal grand jury. It involves alleged false statements involving Medicare. We stress these are accusations. It's an indictment. But he has pretty well known. Brueggemann is spelled Brugggeman, 13-count federal indictment. Apparently involves medical devices, things like braces or genetic testing. But those that's
what's his specialty? Do you know?
I just Googled him and it says family practice.
Yeah. It's and this is a little complicated just reading this, but basically that he allegedly did not assess the patient's condition, never evaluated, but general practice and
inadequate diagnosis, prescribing treatment, and getting paid by Medicare. Right? Is that pretty much what it is?
And not treating the patients again?
That's the False Claims Act.
That's what they're alleging. So we'll see, and I'm sure he's going to have a defense attorney who's going to try to fight this. That usually is what happens, but I want to let people know that
one of these days, Stephanie, you and I need to really have a good doctor-lawyer talk, because people don't. When doctors hear what you just said. I can tell you, doctors in their cars, in their offices, nurse practitioners, PAs sitting there now will go, you know what? Technically, every doctor, every day, probably unknowingly violates that law. You know why? There are different levels of coding with very complex definitions. Is it complex decision making? That's a level 4, which you get paid a little more for. Did you spend X amount of time with the patient? And how much in time did you do 3 bullet points on the review of systems and 4 on the exam, or was it vice versa? And I'm being a little bit simplistic about this. There are trifold and quadrifold little laminated sheets we get that say, make sure you count all the bullet points so when you see Brian for his complaint that you make sure and code it right. You can technically be indicted. You can, the Inspector General can come down on you with criminal and civil penalties for Medicare fraud. Wait, not only if you overcode, if you undercode.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And we know that that's sort of theoretical, but in this politically charged system where we are seeing the weaponization of justice against a citizen, a prominent citizen in this country, your doctor is petrified over what Brian Hauswirth just said. Now, truth be known, probably the guys that are going to get indicted, the guys that say they did 20 cataract surgeries in a 4 hours time or in an 8-hour day, or they did 50, and it's physically impossible.
The lawyer who bills 30 hours a day.
But we just don't trust the system not to bring the hammer on you when those kind of things are out there. That is why more and more of us are jumping off the grid, not dealing with Medicare, not dealing with insurance companies. And you know who's going to get hurt? The patient.
And I've heard complaints from other doctors that a lot of them don't want to take Medicare anymore.
We live in mortal fear of these people.
Medicaid, I believe, is another complaint.
They can bring you down for a good faith mistake. Don't worry about it, doctor. Right? Don't worry about it. The investigation, if it's a one-off, I don't trust those people.
Well, and I will say I've fully escaped and now attend a health practice that doesn't even take insurance, where I have full autonomy over my healthcare choices.
Yeah.
And did that a long time ago, and am happy that I did it. But at the same time, I will say, I mean, it sounds like and you've been critical of lawyers this morning.
I'm not critical of lawyers. I'm critical of the system.
The government, yeah.
The government.
But I would say, it's scary because I have lawyer friends who do, and I don't practice in personal injury, who do practice in personal injury and are like, I would avoid the doctor at all costs. I've seen the craziest things. If I have an injury to my finger, I'll amputate it myself. Wow. And I think that is probably the wrong decision as well. But I think, if there's a crisis we face in our country, certainly I believe it's over healthcare right now. And I don't think we're spending enough time on trying to solve it.
I'm going to say it. You're going to hear this over and over again on this program. We have a problem in this country that lawyers, legislators, doctors, reporters can't fix.
Stupidity.
Look at your church, your synagogue, read the good book. We have a cultural problem in this country. That's the problem. There is no trust among individuals anymore. Everyone thinks that everyone else is out to hurt them, to be self-centered. And frankly, that's the case because we have lost the ethos that comes from the great Judeo-Christian history that begat this country. That's my opinion. I'm sorry.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Randy and Stephanie as well. So, again, I think just to reiterate here for people just tuning in, a doctor, again, Cheri Brueggemann from Columbia has been indicted, a federal grand jury, 13-count indictment. I'll have more throughout the day. There's the federal prosecutors can't say anything more than this. But just to reiterate for people that don't know, you know this, Stephanie, better than anybody else as an attorney, and you know doctor as well. Those are accusations.
Yeah, right.
And he's going to have a defense
attorney. And I'm not
attorney.
here to defend Dr. Brueggemann. Yeah. And Stephanie, if you if every lawyer and every prosecutor had the ethics that you did, I wouldn't be having this discussion. Jack Smith, Judge Engeron, hello. Americans look at the justice system and then they look at the laws that we unknowingly break every day. John Stossel did something on this years ago. Every business owner breaks the law every day. And if someone wants to come after you, they'll find a way to do it. And that scares the hell out of the average American.
And it's the way our systems are set up, and they incentivize certain behaviors. And I would say we see it in other contexts outside of healthcare. Something that's been close to me recently is that we see it in, for example, in policing, right? Like,
there you go.
Why wouldn't you bring a lawsuit? We've seen it in Ashland. We've seen it in Columbia. When you know, even if the city can prove that it did everything right, they have to balance that with the cost of litigating. And we see it in Columbia. And that's a structure, an incentive, a perverse incentive that the system itself breeds. And it doesn't actually get to the truth of the matter.
And to bring it around again to the cultural thing, if people would own their mistakes, most people, even in the realm of medical malpractice, there's been great science on this. If you're the first to say, I'm sorry, I cut the nerve, I really blew it, I apologize, what can I do to make it right? The system has shown, there's been multiple studies that show that the person who was injured gets the best deal in that kind of an arrangement, not through the litigation and the medical malpractice system and everything. If people would own their mistakes, like I did earlier, someone said, Randy, you always run up against a hard break and then they cut off. I own it. I blew it. I'm sorry.
You can even check the Wake Up Mid-Missouri live video feed on YouTube or Facebook.
If people would just own up to their mistakes, the American people used to be a forgiving people. The media is complicit with this gotcha mentality, and the madness has to stop. The madness has to stop.
And don't get the doctor started on managed care.
Mangled care, we call it.
Or land erosion, apparently.
Oh, don't get me going on land erosion. Okay, when we come back, we're going to do leftovers. Stay there, gang. Thanks for being here. You're listening to Wake Up Mid-Missouri. clean out. I mean, that was a purge yesterday.
On any other day, it would have been probably the leading story because it's also Republican on Republican warfare, which the liberal state media loves to cover. So the state auditor, Scott Fitzpatrick, did an audit and was highly critical of the Secretary of State's pullout of ERIC and said it's not helping us clean up our voter rolls. The Secretary of State took offense to that and had a 10 a.m. presser yesterday, which got completely eclipsed by the Senate drama.
I don't understand all the details of this audit, but Rudy Keller in the Missourian, I guess through the Independent, the Missouri Independent, reports that the audit accused Ashcroft's office of illegally withholding information and failing to document withdrawal from a national elections clearinghouse. And Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft said that's a deep state political attack. Now, Jay will be on with Gary Nolan, I understand, in the upcoming Gary Nolan show.
At 9:30.
At 9:30. All right. So I can't wait to tune in then.
And I don't think Scott Fitzpatrick took to the liking of being called part of the deep state.
Call it deep
but
state.
The two of them have been at odds before over certain requirements.
They got beef.
I don't know that they have any personal beef, but certainly they see differently on some issues. And I don't. And Ashcroft is calling this all political. Of course, Ashcroft is running for governor. The auditor is sitting pretty because he's on the off cycle, so he's not running for anything. But has certain duties under the law, and he's saying, look, I had to do this audit. We did the audit, and here are the results. I don't think this is the last we hear about.
He gave him a fair rating, which was a downgrade, the second lowest rating, and a downgrade from a previous audit.
And Jay Ashcroft and the Secretary of State's office, in defense of him, is not the first entity nationwide to pull out of ERIC, the oversight thing for the voter rolls. There's been entities all across the country that have parted company with it.
You're exactly right, John.
If you're Governor Mike Parson getting ready to deliver your State of the State address this afternoon, you're looking around and everything's imploding. It's not a great opening act for your State of the State address, I guess.
We will be covering that live, 93.9 The Eagle and 104.5 News Radio 950 KWS, and on those the webs and apps.
Yep.
3 o'clock.
I may have asked my friend, and since it's my own statement, I'll share a private conversation, but I may have asked my friend Scott Vaughn yesterday, are you canceling this year's Statesman of the Year and just having your own presser today and just saying, look, none of y'all deserve the award this year? He didn't say one way or another.
Or is he giving it to a Democrat?
Oh, man.
It was a rough day yesterday. And I think, Randy, earlier you kind of said, when we were talking to Senator Rowden, it's sad, right? Because there are, even though I'm a limited government gal, there are some priorities that I think we left sitting on the table. There are some priorities I'd like to see get done this year. And a lot of these people, I think, are personal friends of ours. Yes. And I might disagree with some of their behavior, but I think a lot of them are right on the issues. Like even on the Freedom Caucus side, I think some of their issues and their stances on those issues are where I fall. And I'd like to see those pushed forward. But I don't think anyone's helping their cause when the behavior is like it is currently.
They need to bring in like a couples counselor onto the Senate floor. Just
not
have
a
a
bad
session.
idea.
Yeah, just have a session,
Yeah, it just seems like all civility and camaraderie and collegiality have gone out of the conference. Meanwhile, the Democrats are loving it, right?
Oh,
They're just
John Rizzo and those guys are just saying thank you.
Yeah. And we should remember that this committee process, which I guess bills have to go through, right, unless there's some nuclear thing like the amendment the other day, which was a cry for help from Bill Eigel about the IP. The Democrats have a voice, too. There's procedure. It takes time. Plus, when you hear something and you're a sitting senator, I would imagine you hear something, you want to go back and research it. So things are not going to run at the pace that the citizens would like always.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there are issues out there that everyone can agree on. And maybe if we can find that issue and get one like a debt, like Dave Ramsey's debt snowball, if we can find one little thing and get it done, hopefully we can make progress. One thing I think that's on the table is cracking down on swatting. I think everyone can agree